We're waiting. We want to hear you.
Okay, everybody, thank you all for coming. We're really excited for you to see the exhibit downstairs. I'm Summer. I'm the curator here at the museum. Before we get started, everybody please turn off or silence your phones so we don't have any disruptions. I know Thea gave some announcements, but I'll give some more. Tomorrow we will have Fiesta de Santa Maria at the Farmers Market from 9 a.m. to 12 p.m., which will include Hispanic music, living history, and performances. So it's kind of a continuation of tonight, so we hope to see you there. We're also going to be participating in Falling for Shrimp on October 1st through the 3rd. So just like Shrimp Fest, we'll have a booth outside the palace, so come see us for that or sign up to volunteer. Our next brown bag on October 6th will be with John Royale from the St. Mary's Tall Ship Alliance, who will talk about the history of tall ships. And then our next Third on Third on October 15th will be with Denise Bosey, who will talk about Indigenous Northeast Florida. So that's it for announcements, but tonight we have Berta Isabel Arias, one of our board members here at the museum. She was born in Havana, Cuba, and spent most of her life in Chicago before moving to Amelia Island 11 years ago. Berta taught at the college level for 30 years and retired as a professor emeritus in world languages and international education, during which time she traveled the world and helped develop 12 critical languages and 10 international programs. On the island, she is on various boards besides here at the museum: the Amelia Tree Conservancy, the American Beach Property Owners Association, the Philanthropic Educational Organization. Yay! Berta has published 3 books, 2 of which are based in Cuba. As you will hear tonight from her, in her research in Cuba, she developed close ties with the artist community in Baracoa, which led to the downstairs art exhibit. So everyone please welcome Berta.
That's what happens when you're among family and friends, right? Anyway, thanks so much for coming, and hopefully I'll share some really interesting things about our very unique connection here in Fernandina to Cuba. And the art exhibit that is downstairs is really totally connected to all of this. So we will start with why we're here and Jose Marti. How many of you know Jose Marti and have seen the plaque in front, of course, of the Florida House Inn, which is only like 3 blocks away. So during this lecture, I'm going to be talking a lot about him because he is what connects Fernandina to Cuba, and particularly to the part of Cuba that is where our art is from, and that is Baracoa, and I'll be talking about that. And there are actually 2 connections that we have. The first connection that I'll talk about is the historical one because of Jose Marti, and the second one is really the historic one because of what we're doing. Why the Florida connection? Well, Columbus, kind of came to the Americas. And I say that because depending on what side you are, of the spectrum, he either devastated America or discovered America. But anyway, he came here. And he did land in Cuba. And interestingly, where he landed is this town of Baracoa. And I get to use this. I haven't used this in many years since I retired. But anyway, so this is Cuba. This is, of course, we know we're here. And I always kind of get upset that we don't have a little dot for Amelia Island, but that's where we are. And Baracoa is all the way here. Havana is what most people know about. That's 90-mile distance between the Keys and Havana. But Baracoa is this right here, and so he landed there in November of '92. And we know the rest of the story. I mean, we have been connected from Florida to really Cuba for a long time. Trade, commerce. In the 1700s, Cuban exiles started coming here. So it's been a constant connection between our state and the entire country, right? The Spaniards were, as they were in all the countries. And this is really a very disturbing image, but I think it tells you really what they did with the indigenous people. And the indigenous people are very important to this discussion because they were very important actually to Jose Marti. When we talk about Jose Marti, he was many things, but one of the things is he wanted freedom for and respect for everyone. And he had actually traveled to the part of Cuba that has the most indigenous still artifacts and history, and that is, again, this town of Baracoa, the city of Baracoa. So the Taínos, that's how it's pronounced, were pretty much, they thought the Spaniards were coming to live peacefully with them, and very quickly they realized that they were going to be subjugated by them, and some small uprisings started across the island. And again, not all of Cuba in this section of the eastern part of Cuba. Some of you know the eastern part of Cuba because that is also where Guantanamo is, right? So Guantanamo actually is right around here, and Baracoa is right over here. So, Atoy is considered the very first Cuban freedom fighter. And he was burned at the stake in 1512 after, again, the 10 years pretty much that the Cubans were trying to organize against the Spaniards. Now, of course, you know, the poor Taíno who were actually described by the Spaniards as being very soft, they were not warlike like they found later on in different parts of Latin America. They were soft, kind people in general. It was very easy for the Spaniards to take over, not to mention the weapons they had and the numbers they had, right? So every skirmish that started, the Spaniards won. And Atoy was burned at the stake, a very brutal thing in any culture, I suppose. And the story goes, and the scribes that came with the conquistadores took note of everything, to be completely honest. They were incredible writers of what was happening. And they said that he was offered that if he became a Christian, he would go to heaven. And his answer was, well, will you Spaniards be there? And he said, of course, we're Christians. Then he said, well, then I don't want to go there. That is the story about Atoy. So he is our very first freedom fighter. And what happens is, why the fight for independence from Spain that is associated with Jose Marti? Well, after Atoy and after the Taíno really fled into the mountains of Cuba, into the mountains of Baracoa, for the next 300 years, most of Latin America, what we consider the Spanish-speaking Latin America, was controlled by the Spaniards, and it wasn't really until 1776. We don't really give credit to our American Revolution, but our American Revolution inspired other people for freedom, and it really inspired Latin America for freedom. And they realized that if a small group of American rebels were able to become independent from a superpower such as Britain, it was a possible thing. So between 1810 and 1860, 17 of the 19 countries, Spanish-speaking, in Central and South America became free. So this was the time, the century is, we have to get rid of these Spaniards, right? Why the fight for independence? It continues that what I want to mention is that when Jose Marti is born, and he's born in 1853, he is born into a time of freedom for Latin America. By the time he's born, there have already been 4 filibusters, and I love this word because we have a different idea of filibusters, those crazy people in Congress, right? But filibuster is, its original meaning, really, or a secondary meaning, is that it's an illegal expedition of arms and supplies to a foreign country to seek the overthrow of this government. And that is how many, many countries in Latin America became free. They had support from the Americans, really, who wanted freedom, and they could understand that other people wanted it as well. So, and it also was a moneymaker, as we shall see. It was a moneymaker for captains who, took the risk of loading up arms, supplies, and going to whatever country it was. And in Cuba, by the time that Marti was born, there have already been 4 unsuccessful ones. Now, unsuccessful, I think if I were planning a filibuster of any kind, I don't think I would land my ships in the Havana harbor, but that's what happened to these four. They were taking the ships, they figured that's the best harbor, Havana, but it's also where the seat of the Spanish government was, right? So I say that because Martí learned, and when he planned his own filibuster that we will be talking about, he went where? To Baracoa, the eastern coast, where nobody really wanted to go. Very difficult to get there. And this is Jose Martí. He is the hero. I mean, the international airport in Cuba is named after him. There are books about him. He was a poet, a writer, a playwright, a diplomat, a teacher, and lived a very, very short life to accomplish all that. And there's a wonderful song that some of you may know, the Guantanamera, that is, yes, who knows that song? Right? Can anybody sing it? Oh, there you go. Thank you.
Mary.
That's it. All right. So I think it was Pete Seeger who made it really popular. But the words come from one of his very popular poems. And what the words really mean is that before he dies, he wants to express his sincere, authentic soul. And that's what really Martí was, a very authentic person. And I did this because I have now teenage grandchildren. And I'm thinking about what they're doing at 15, and it's not starting a revolution. And neither was I really at this time. But anyway, Martí really had a brief but amazing life. He died at 42. So I put some of the highlights here. He was born of Spanish parents, but already at 15, he joins an anti-colonial, meaning anti-Spain, group and gets into trouble with that. At 16, he already publishes his first play. And at 17, I think my grandson is looking at colleges. At 17, Jose Martí is incarcerated, and then sentenced to 6 years of hard labor. Because of his writings in journals, in newspapers, abroad, etc., against the Spanish and colonialism. His parents managed to get him out of the country. He becomes really persona non grata in Cuba, and they send him to Spain, where he graduates at the age of 21 in law. He goes back to Central America again. He's not really wanted in Cuba. And so he goes back to Central America, and he becomes a teacher, continues to write. He becomes very, very well known because of his writings and his poetry especially, and because of his anti-colonialism, which again, in recent decades, a Latin American country, 17 had become independent. The only two left were Cuba and Puerto Rico at this time. So there was this big push for, get those Spaniards out. And so he was really mirroring what society wanted at that time. If we look at what happens, let's see, where am I? Oh no, this is the other way. At 25, he actually gets a job. His English was pretty good, and he becomes a journalist in New York. And so, 25, can you imagine all the things that he has already done? But he continues to travel Latin America, and now in the 90s, and this is really where he takes off, at the age of 38, he is so well known that he keeps he is invited constantly to different functions that have to do with freedom force for not only Cuba and Puerto Rico, but just in general. And he gives a key speech, and I think the picture. Do I? No? Yeah. I love this picture. So he's in the middle here somewhere, surrounded by, let me see if I can find him. That is Jose right there. And he gives a speech that is so dynamic that what ends up happening is that he forms the Cuban Revolutionary Party here in Tampa, or here in Florida in Tampa, and starts funneling funds that people were giving. And you're talking from all the research is that these were small donations, big donations. People in Florida were donating for the cause, which hadn't happened before. All the other filibusters were here, there, everywhere. And he was really coalescing, organizing that sentiment of we have to do something, and we have to do it perhaps from outside of Cuba. So in 1893, at all of 40, he comes to Florida. He's been in Florida many times, but he comes to this part of Florida, and he actually pens the Fernandina plan that we will talk about. Unfortunately, it falls apart, and we'll talk about that as well, and he dies at 42. So what a life, right? I mean, such a short life, but the passion that drove him is incredible. Now, why Fernandina, right? And I'm going the other way. Here we go. Well, I like Goldilocks, and so he could have taken himself to Key West, but Key West was too small and actually too close to Cuba in a way. Tampa was too big and overrun really by a lot of Spanish spies. I mean, the Spaniards knew that things were happening, right? They had already lost 17 countries. So they knew that something was happening, and that something was happening in Florida. So the Spaniards had spies, and believe it or not, Pinkerton dates back to this time. Right? So there were spies everywhere, but Fernandina was just right. So he comes here, and he organizes the, and again, I'm going the other way, sorry guys. He organizes himself by bringing a couple of the rebel people that he trusted to Fernandina. They check into the Florida House Inn, and there is a plaque. If you haven't seen it, it says that Cuban patriot and poet, champion of liberty and of respect of human dignity, lived here in February 1893. Well, actually, it was 1893 on and off through 1895, right? So he would come here and stay, and he actually registered himself as D.H. Mandel. And I don't know why that name of all things, but he registered himself as an owner of a plantation in Baracoa that had come to Fernandina because it had a good port and access to the ocean to organize ships to take supplies back to his coffee plantation in Baracoa. Very legitimate, right? And this is where he actually, let's not talk about that yet. This is where he meets Nathaniel Borden, who owned the lumber company here in Fernandina, and he hires Borden to get him 3 ships and to find arms, rifles, anything he can, as well as supplies that are going to be taken to not just Cuba, to Baracoa, back to the city. I keep saying it because that's really what connects us to this small place over there. And so while he continues, so 93, 94, Jose Marti continues to give speeches, continues to gather money that is all being the money that's paying for the ships. Borden goes to Boston, gets 3 ships there, the Amadis, the Baracoa, and the Lagonda, and they had to build them, right? And so these 3 ships were going to be built. They were going to come down from Boston here into the port. And again, all of this was paying people off along the way to make sure that what was known by the public was that the ships were taking supplies for this man Mandel in Baracoa, right? Well, unfortunately, you know, when you drink too much, sometimes things happen. A lot of things happen here. So, one of the things that, again, as brilliant as he was invited to the Fernandina Social Club, and he registered himself in 1894 with his own name. I think he thought that he was in good company, that he was, you know, people who wanted him there, etc. But spies don't usually have a sign that says I'm the spy. So nobody really understands how he could have missed that particular moment where he actually went there and signed himself into the Fernandina Social Register as himself. So somebody there must have recognized him. First of all, if they said Jose Marti, he was known everywhere. He was known in this country and in Florida especially, right? And he known as somebody that supported the revolution. So also whistleblowing role of informants and the blunders and the indiscretions of the Cuban rebels. There was a lot of records that show that a lot of the people that, well, he didn't come with a big group, but the group that he came with, as he went off to Tampa and Jacksonville and Miami and places where he gave speeches to gather more support for the revolution, the people stayed behind making sure that things were going right with Borden. Well, they went to the bars and started kind of talking that, well, we're here, but we really have a secret mission. Well, these are facts that, unbelievable but true. So Spain's diplomatic influence in Fernandina, and actually in all of Florida, managed then to alert the U.S. Customs, and all of this now is happening at the end of 1894. And that was really the period that he had thought that the 3 ships would be landing. He'd be taking off from Fernandina and going to Baracoa. But everything stopped because they understood that they had lost somehow the credibility that they had, that he was some kind of a coffee magnate, that he needed these ships. And so luckily, they were able to salvage a lot of the arms, etc., because just like they had spies on the Spanish side, then there were people who were also for the Cuban Revolution. So they were able to unload some of the ships. Actually, only 2 of them made it to Fernandina. One of them never even made it here. But 2 of them made it to Fernandina, and they had to unload the arms, and some of the arms went into the bay. Martí fled Fernandina. They told him to leave, and he actually ended up in Jacksonville, and from Jacksonville going back to Cuba. So he returned to Cuba, totally dejected because, everything, okay, so these are not the ships, but this is where the ships would have taken off from, and the Nathaniel boarding company that was there. And so he left for Cuba in February, had never been a soldier. He was a writer, he was a poet. He was a revolutionary in his soul, but not as a trained person. And so insisted on going into battle and died the very first time out on May 19th of 1895. He is the founding father of Cuban independence, and you say Martí, and people recognize his name everywhere. Now, the war did not end there, and this is really a fascinating period, and for those of you who are historians, I suggest you read about Napoleon Broward and his own filibustering in Florida. He became a millionaire, and interesting, and of course, we know a lot of politicians who kind of go that route. He was rather well, he would have been a criminal at this time because this was a criminal act to do a filibuster. But he was a filibustero, as we would say in Spanish, in 1895, and in 1905 he was Florida governor. Very interesting. Needless to say, right? There's a lot we can add to that. But one of my favorite stories about him is, again, and there's very good documentation that this happened. So the way the filibustering would happen was, well, we already heard about Martín. Now, he actually hired Borden to do getting the ships, but if you were a captain and you knew who wanted this to go to Cuba, for example, you could make millions, right? You were transporting things illegally. So the story about the 3 friends, which by itself I think is funny right there, right? Los tres amigos, if anybody's ever heard that. Right? Steve Martin and the 3 friends?
Yeah.
So, but the 3 friends here, not as funny as Steve Martin, he left the port of Fernandina with the 3 friends. Again, he knew how to fake the bills of lading. So he was taking supplies to Cuba. Cuba had a lot of plantations on the eastern part of Cuba. So he was taking supplies. The story goes that by the time he got to the Keys, in the middle of the night, he and the crew painted the ship, changed the name, went into Cuba, dropped off the arms, came back the same way, painted the ship back, put 3 friends on it, and this hit the newspaper here in Florida, in Northeast Florida. So amazing and I think very fun story. But a lot of American captains made money, millions of dollars during this period of 1895 to 1898 because the Fernandina plan did not succeed, but it was successful in telling the people in Cuba that they had support in the United States, that money was flowing in, that they were being supported philosophically, politically, and with money now, which they hadn't had before. So they had the Cuban Revolutionary Party that was still getting money. So this is really interesting. At the same time that the filibustering is going on, the United States starts getting very concerned that with all of this commotion, the Spaniards may invade, and if they invade the United States, well, where are they going to go? They're going to invade Florida, right? So Northeast Florida in particular becomes really, well, Tampa had army barracks, etc. And in our area, Fort Clinch is a place where they also were training the Fort Clinch is down a couple of miles from here, for those of you who are not from our area. Fort Clinch was another place where they were training the soldiers. And I love this picture of Teddy Roosevelt. This is, of course, before he became, the man that we know. But they don't even say what camp it was, but it's considered the first coast around 1897, right before the war broke out. And at the very top, and this is my favorite, Camp Amelia, right here on our island, was set up to take care of the sick. And so we were ready for war. I think the United States was ready for the Spanish to invade. One more slide about what happened here is, this is fascinating, and I actually was involved in part of this when this was discovered. I don't know how many of you know Wayne Woods from Jacksonville, but he is the historian for Jacksonville, and he and I did some talks on this. But in 2013, somebody bought a lot in Fort Caroline thinking he was going to build, and instead, and we have people here who know what happened with that, instead they found that it was really an artillery battery right there in that area that was pointed at in case the Spanish ships, because they imagined if the Spanish ships came by, it would be St. Augustine and then the Jacksonville area. So now you can go there and actually see this area that is part of Fort Caroline. So the very last things that happened, and my apologies, but those are very disturbing pictures. So yellow journalism was pretty much involved as well in bringing about the Spanish-American War. So yellow journalism, and I think that has come back, unfortunately, to our lives. But yellow journalism, at this time, we had the two major newspapers in New York, Joseph Pritzker with the New York World and William Hearst with the New York Journal, were at war with each other, trying to get more and more readership. So it is said that Hearst told somebody, well, you find me the pictures and I'll create the war. So they were all about, sensationalist writing. However, in Cuba, they didn't have to go too far to really get sensationalism, because this was happening. And very disturbing to me that Spain in 1895, right after, in 1895, after Martí gets killed, the Spaniards realized that hasn't at all tamped down the revolution. In fact, it's actually incited people more into revolution. They send General Weyler, a Spanish general who was known for his atrocities in any place that he actually was in charge of. So they sent him there, and what does he do? Because he knows that the revolution and the rebels are basically in the eastern part of Cuba, he starts these camps and starts herding people into the camps, Cubans, saying that this is to protect the Cuban population from the rebels. And of course, this is completely turned around, right? The rebels were actually being supported by the Cuban population. But under the guise of protection, he started these camps, and they were literally concentration camps. From 1895 till the war, 400,000 people died in these camps. And I mean, yes. So, between the fear of war, the support that they had here from the Cubans, and yellow journalism, all of this coming together, the last thing that happened that actually brought about independence for Cuba was the sinking of the Maine. Now, scholars still discuss who really sank the Maine. There are three theories. One is that the Spaniards did indeed sink the Maine. The other is that something happened, just a natural explosion on the ship. And the last, that we sank the Maine in order to have a reason to go to war with Spain. We don't know. So the war lasted 4 months. It was declared by the United States against Spain in April, and it was over by August. And in August of 1898, Cuba became independent, and so did Puerto Rico. Martí is the hero, the symbol of Cuban desire for freedom and independence, but he really is so much more. As a writer, the sense that he had about the dignity of man, that the races should all be living together, that there should be no distinction between the people who considered themselves biracial black or the people who were Indian descent, that dignity was what humanity required, and freedom. So even though he died and did not get to see Cuba become independent, and he died thinking, obviously, that the Fernandina plan had not been successful, it really was just the opposite. It gave everybody the reality that there was a movement behind them, and so Cuba became independent because of the Fernandina plan. And so our connection here in our little city, really, to all this incredible historical event is amazing. And now we come to the historic part of our connection, which is that we have the very first ever exhibit of art from Baracoa, artists from Baracoa here downstairs. And so what you'd see downstairs, some of you have had the opportunity to go, and those of you who have not yet, you'll get to go after the lecture. You'll see art that is really very different from perhaps what you imagine when you think of Cuba. I think when I imagine Cuba, what I've seen in the pictures, the very thing that comes to mind are the beautiful restored vintage cars, the 50s cars that are, in Havana. So I think of, photographs or drawings of that. I think of people smoking cigars, men and women smoking cigars. The Capitol building, which is quite beautiful. The beautiful, really colonial architecture. Also the deteriorating buildings. So it's all over the place, but those are the images that I think people, when they think of Cuban art, what they see. Baracoa, because it is so remote, surrounded by mountains, and 500 miles away from Havana, and we'll talk about that in a second, it has its own personality. And the art that you see downstairs, you will see no cars, you will see no cigars, you will see something which is very different. It's very beautiful, I think. But it's art that is really deep into the mythology of the ancestors. So a lot of the things that you'll see downstairs and that I saw when I visited are connected to the Taíno, to the religious ceremonies, to nature. I lost it, nature. And I had to include this picture because nature in Baracoa is what you imagine would be pretty much paradise. In fact, I remember Matthew hit Baracoa very, very hard. It actually destroyed it. And I remember when I finally was able to get an email from the photographer who is responsible for the work downstairs. His name is Heo. Giovanni, but he goes by Heo. And I finally got through to him a week later or so through email and said, "How are things?" And he said, "I have my mountains and I have my coffee." So things are So nature informs everything. And I have this picture because in my getting around the place, this woman said her last name is Arias, therefore we must be related, right? So I thought that was very, very interesting. So back to this. So we have art downstairs that is from Baracoa. And I think what's historic about it is that, again, I can tell you with 100% certainty, this hasn't happened anywhere, anytime. And I think it brings to full circle the whole connection that this city has. So Fernandina is connected to Cuba, Baracoa, because Jose Martí stayed here. And his plan was to deliver those arms for the revolution in Baracoa, right? Didn't happen, but that's what happened. And now we have an art exhibit, which is nowhere else, with artists from that area being represented here. I mean, it gives me chills just to think about it. And at this point, I really do want to, before I go any further, I want to thank so many people here. The board for not thinking that I was really crazy, wanting to an exhibit from a foreign country, and especially a country that is so isolated like Cuba. To our director, museum director, Phyllis Davis, and all the staff really at the museum, but especially to two women. One is sitting right there, Summer Bias, who was our curator, and I don't know where Jennifer England is. Jennifer? She's downstairs. Oh, she's in the overflow. We have an overflow. so Jennifer, what do I say? How to Jennifer? Thank you. So Jennifer, who is our media and operations manager, thank you, has been involved in this project since the very beginning. And how it began really was at the beginning of this year. We were talking here in the museum about how to use and what exhibits to bring to our beautiful exhibit room that you saw or that you will see later on. And I mentioned, well, what about an exhibit from Baracoa? And again, they said, okay. And off we went. And why did I want to do this exhibit from Baracoa? Well, this is my own personal story. 6 years ago, when I started planning my new novel, I really become fascinated with the indigenous Taino from Cuba, because I had no idea they existed really. In my own studies, they were like a blip. And so I've become more interested in this, and so I thought I needed to go to Baracoa, right? So I emailed my family here in Havana, who said, why do you want to go there? You've never been there. There's nothing there. Honest to God story. I said, well, but I want to learn about the Taino. Well, why do you want to learn about the Taino? They're dead. This is my honest to God story. They're dead, and this is my family is very highly educated, but in this case, very dense, I think. Anyway, so I knew I wasn't going to go anywhere with them. So I kept trying to figure out how I would get there, because it is really very difficult to get to Baracoa. And I was lucky enough, you know how things work in the universe. I met a woman, her name is Soledad, who actually lives in St. Augustine and who has done mission work in Central America for years. And one of those things, I met her and she said, well, I'm going to go there. So if you are there when I'm there, I'll introduce you to the archaeologist, Roberto. And I said, okay. So I met her June of 2016 in Havana after visiting my family, who kept saying, please don't go. Honest story. Please don't go, please don't go, please don't go. So we went across 500 miles. Around Guantanamo, we started going up this mountain called La Farola, which was built in the late 1960s. And we left Havana at 6:30. We got to the hotel at 1 o'clock in the morning. I had already, this is the trip. So I had looked into how to get there myself, right, if I wanted to go. And so there are buses that will take you from Guantanamo up the mountain, then over the mountain to what is Baracoa. I found this in the Intrepid Traveler. Has anybody ever looked at that? It's a funny blog. But a person who actually had taken this trip up the mountain said that this is how it felt. And that's exactly how it felt to me. Now, happily, I did this in the middle of the night, and I was so exhausted, I really couldn't care if I lived or died, I think, at that point. I survived, and I should not even kid. I mean, people do go off this road every year. And in fact, 2 years ago, 2019, interestingly, one of the men who had gotten involved in Taino archaeology, his name is Patrick Tesseron. Some of you who drink cognac may know the name. He is one of the principals of the Tesseron cognac from 1770, I think they've been around. He had become really interested in Baracoa and in chocolate and in the archaeology, and his bus went off and everybody was killed. Two Canadian and so I shouldn't even make fun of it. But the next day, when I woke up, this is what I saw.
Oh, wow.
And so that's the town of Baracoa. I have to say, it looks much better in the pictures. Up close and personal, you're talking buildings that are very old, that have not been kept up. But in terms of the setting, you can't get anything more beautiful than this, and that is the bay. So I love this picture. It's not mine, but it is from a wonderful article in the Smithsonian from 2018. And what the reason I cut it out, aside from being or copied it here, is because he mentions, the author Ross mentions the man who is pretty much my best friend in Baracoa, and who is the lead person in Cuba for the art exhibit. He is Roberto Fernandez, and you can read a little bit about him. He's been collecting artifacts and going into caves since he was 17. He is determined that he's going to bring back as much as he can of the Taino culture back into Cuban history, and not only into the area, but into Cuban history. And he is considered the expert. And in fact, this is his book, published last year in 2020. This is Roberto. And this is his book, which if you speak Spanish, it is fascinating and wonderful. And actually, this is La Pipa de Boma. There's actually a painting downstairs that you will see. And Roberto managed to send this to me. He made a reproduction because, again, we're good friends, and he knows that I love all this stuff. And as much as I love the museum, I will not leave this here. So he made me a reproduction of this pipe, which is the only one of its kind found, which was used in, that we put hallucinogenic things here, and the shamans, the caciques, would breathe this in order to inform the people of what they needed to do. And so he sent this to me through Soledad 2 years ago. But he wrote this book, which is absolutely fascinating. And so back to how we met. So I had been told by Soledad that we got there that day after that crazy drive, that Roberto could see me for about half an hour in his home. He didn't have any more time because he was exploring a new cave. So in Cuba, the archaeology is basically in caves. It's not pyramids, it's cave, because that's where they lived. And so I said, sure, half an hour with the person who is the expert in all of Cuba, I'll take it. So I met with him, and this is the two of us in that cave that he has turned into the only Taino museum in the entire country. Wow. Now, I don't know why I'm so sweaty and he is not, but maybe he's used to it. But what a fascinating moment for me to be in this space with him. Because when I went to his place, and he was very polite, I sat down, and he said, I'm sorry, but I only have half an hour. I said, yeah, I understand. Well, you're from Miami. And I said, no, I'm from North Florida, a place called Fernandina. And he said, Fernandina, Jose Marti. And all of a sudden, now of course, when he said it, it clicked in my head. Oh yeah, but I didn't realize what that meant. He went on to say they had never seen anybody from Fernandina. They didn't go to Fernandina. Honest to God, he wanted to know what it was like, wanted to know if I knew where Jose Marti, it went on, right? So the half hour was already gone. And so, but he's so interested, and I'm so excited because now I have more time with this man. And then he said finally, well, what is it that you really want to know about the Taino? And I said, well, I'm really interested in perhaps seeing one of the sites that I learned about from the research I've done, and I've researched Mark Harrington. And he said, ¿Tú conoces a Mark Harrington? You know Mark Harrington? I said, well, I don't know him, but I know his book from. So he takes my book, sees everything that I have, and he says, that's what we study here. He is the authority, and that's what I studied in Havana at the University of Havana. So, next question was, do you want to go to the cave with me? So, we are wonderful friends. Now, I learned the word, not from him, but then I said, I went caving, and somebody said, no, you went spelunking. I said, yeah. So, this is Roberto in his house showing me one of the finds, one of the artifacts. Those are pictures that I took inside the cave. I think the one on top I finally took outside the cave because there was a lot of bat activity in there. And Roberto felt very comfortable with the bats flying around him. I did not. But I did get the pictures of the petroglyphs. And so he and I pretty much got together a few times in the caves And it was just fascinating, right? So then he said, well, you need to meet other people because, you know, the archaeology is tied to our art. We have a very active artist community here. I really did not know any of that. So he started introducing me to everybody. So he introduced me to the artists, and you can see I was able to visit some of the studios, and actually some of the art is from these that we have downstairs from these artists here. The historians, the linguists, there was a man at that time that was writing a book about the words in Cuba, not necessarily in all Spanish, that really referred to Taino ceremonies, Taino food, etc. And the writers. So he introduced me to everybody, and the introduction was like this. Berta, la cubana de Fernandina. So I was Berta, the Cuban from Fernandina. And everybody would go, oh, Fernandina. I felt like a unicorn, or I don't even know, a Martian, but a very welcome Martian. So if you are ever in Baracoa, in Cuba probably, but especially in Baracoa, again, for the circular thing that we have with them, right? The doors will be open to you. People will give you whatever they have and want to just know where you are from. So it was just an amazing experience. Now, originally, we were going to have this as a poster exhibit, which is what we have downstairs, and then the actual work was going to be at their Casa Cultural. That hasn't happened, but let me talk about how we got these posters. So once the museum said, sure, go ahead and do the project, I learned from Summer and Jennifer that we needed, in order for us to be able to create wonderful posters, we needed good photography. Well, you cannot get anything out of Cuba, so nothing downstairs is an original thing because of the embargo. There really is no movement of anything from one place to the other. I got this, and I myself brought some art because as an individual, if you travel there are things you can't get out, but not like going to the FedEx office and mailing something. They cannot do that. So we knew from the beginning that nothing was going to be able to come out of Cuba. So making posters, right? Well, in Baracoa, there is one professional artist who is the man who took most of the photographs there. We do have a photographer in training, the only woman in this entire project, Isabel, who did some of the photographs as well. And there was one good camera. Now, in Baracoa, again, you're this isolated area of Cuba. There are some cars and there are some buses, but none of these people, and I know 2/3 of the artists that are downstairs. I met them and I dined with them, and I've kept in communication with them for the last 5 years through basically email. And they send me things for my blog, etc. So they get around on foot or by bike, or maybe they get a ride from some bus that's coming by. So from January, when we started this program, with the one camera, Geo and Isabel somehow got the artist, either they went to their house, or if it was possible, the artist would bring the art to their house. That's how they took the photographs. So they took photographs with one camera. Then, of course, the deal was, how do they get it to me? Well, the internet in Cuba is very unreliable. Some of the time I would get things at 2 o'clock in the morning because for whatever reason, maybe, that's a hot time for them to get things through. Or it would come through, did you get it? No, I didn't get it, or I would get half of it, or it would come in scrambled, right? I mean, all kinds of things. So Jennifer and Summer created this spreadsheet so that we would know, what artists had sent what information. Did they send it all? Was the picture good quality? And that's what we have been involved in here for 9 months.
Wow.
So kudos to these ladies for all the work that they have done. Amazing work, and you'll see it downstairs. So originally, they were so excited. They have been so excited that this is happening because Cuba isolated normally, and then with the pandemic, correct? Imagine if we were isolated, imagine them. This has been this has been what they have been thinking about for 9 months. what they have been, I mean, they have put blogs out there that I didn't even know. Every time they have a chance, they'll blog out that they're having an art exhibit in Fernandina. And so it breaks my heart that they cannot be here. Anyway.
Someday.
Yeah, one day. But let's move on. So we have awards that were given out by some wonderful volunteer artists from our own community, and I'm not sure who's here other than Arthur. Anybody else? Casey or Sharon or Julie? But stand up, because I mean, yes. So Arthur and 3 other artists not only donated money, and I thank all the donors here who have made this possible, because all of this has been put together with donations from you, and they themselves donated money in order to award some of the pictures, and the artists will get the money. So these are the awards that that our volunteer artists decided. Again, they're fascinating, and you'll see them downstairs. And always around the themes. I think the themes are very interesting, right? I mean, they're somewhat political, but basically it's nature, it's mythology, it's beauty, it's sadness, it's overwhelming. And so this week in particular, so let me back up. So the Casa Cultural was going to have this simultaneous exhibit, and then we know that July 11th, demonstrations hit all over Cuba. The internet shut down. Now, thankfully, we had everything. By July 11th, we knew that we were going to have this regardless. But I couldn't get through to them, and they couldn't get through to me about anything for about a month. When finally the internet came back on, which would have been, well, let's see, at the end of August, pretty much, it was in spurts. It was in the middle of the night, and they wanted to know what was happening because they hadn't been able to get anything from me. And I told them, and I kept sending them things. And so I send it to the crew. There are about 5 people who are responsible, and they're the ones that then spread the word. And they must walk, bicycle, or whatever, and then they show the pictures. So I send it to everybody. One person will get it. I don't know. They have some Cuban guy in the government going like, yes, no, yes, no. You know, and so it is pretty sad. But we keep sending everything. And so yesterday, beginning of the week, I said everything's ready. And yesterday, Summer sent me pictures of the setup, and they have gotten it. And so this morning, I got this picture from Hale, who said this is an indigenous butterfly from Cuba, and thank you. That they wanted us to know that they know it's not just me, that it's the museum and it's the team, and that today, despite the fact that there are restrictions and they're not supposed to get together, that they will be getting together and celebrating us and us as we celebrate them. So thank you for coming. Is that now it's time to really see everything I've been talking to you about. We have a wonderful exhibit downstairs that will be on through the end of November, and the posters that are up. Again, we could not get any of the actual work. One day, perhaps we will. But right now, you'll see posters, and there are copies of the posters. The exact posters, same size and everything, are for sale. So if anybody wants them, some of them have already been sold because we did have a reception for donors. And again, for the donors, thank you so much for sending the money that you did, because it will pay for all this, and it will pay for the prices that we will be sending back to them. So imagine in Cuba, the last time I checked, $1 was the equivalent of 20 whatever currency they have right now. So whatever they get, even if it's $10, I mean, in some cases, they'll have a month of salary for anything that they sell. So I encourage you to pick out something you love. There only is one copy. I don't know if we would go any further in the future, but there is one copy, and some of them have already been sold. But if you just want to come and enjoy, the exhibit will be on through November. So I think, did I miss anything, Summer?
So there's a silent auction that ends at 8, but it also has a buy now auction. So if you want to bid on a piece, there's a binder in the space, but you can also just take the sheet to the front desk and do the buy now.
There you go.
Berta,
Yes.
Tell everybody what's going on tomorrow.
Oh, tomorrow, as they said at the beginning, tomorrow is the Fiesta. So the museum is celebrating Hispanic Heritage Month with a whole bunch of different things. Today is just one of the events. But tomorrow, in the parking lot of Pineland Bank, off of Center and 7th Street, we will have a street fair, food, dancing, music. So come on by, 9 to 12.
All right.
All right. So enjoy. Thank you so much.